for another order of towels after his Hoyas dried off Syracuse in the Big East final. And from the SEC, Alabama's Wimp Sanderson is also planning for March Madness while others wait and watch as the moment of decision is here on the road to the Final Four.
CBS Sports presents the NCAA Tournament Selection Show, sponsored by Audi.
Once again, everyone, I'm Jim Nance, and after days of speculation, at long last, the moment is upon us when we now learn which 64 teams have been selected for this year's NCAA Championship Tournament. We'll be going out live to Kansas City for the official announcement momentarily. Also, we'll talk with Selection Committee Chairman Dick Schultz about some of the reasoning behind the tough decisions that were made. And Brent Musburger and Billy Packer have trekked uptown from the Garden. We'll get their thoughts on this year's tournament field as well. Right now, though, let's go out live to Kansas City and our man, Tim Brandt. Tim?
All right, Jim, all eyes now are firmly focused on Kansas City. We're now ready to announce the 64-team field for the 1987 Men's Basketball Tournament. The road to the Final Four does begin here today in Kansas City. And hello again, everybody. I'm Tim Brandt, and for the third year in a row, the NCAA Tournament is a 64-team field, which means there will be no first-round buys. Of the 64 teams, there is a little bit of a switch this year. Instead of 29 automatic bids for conference champions, this year there are only 28. The reason for that, Memphis State won the Metro Conference Championship. Now, Memphis State, is on probation, cannot participate in the tournament. So, consequently, we had 36 at-large bids. The primary objective of the selection committee, they try to make it as balanced as possible in all 4 regions. There are 4 geographic regions. Now, before we go to the board, let us show you the 4 top seeds in the country. In the East, the Tar Heels of North Carolina. Dean Smith has done it again. In the Southeast, the Hoyas of Georgetown, which won the Big East tournament today. In the Midwest, the Hoosiers of Indiana. And in the West, the Running Rebels of UNLV. So now we're all set, and I'm going to go through this very slowly so those of you at home can write it down and see where the team of your choice is playing and which bracket. Now, right now, we'll start in the East in Charlotte, North Carolina. These games are Thursday and Friday, March 12th and 14th. The Tar Heels of North Carolina, which won the tournament in 1982. The last time the tournament was held in New Orleans, it was the Tar Heels against Georgetown. And what a game it was. The biggest crowd ever to watch this game. Dean Smith was masterful. It came down to this. Freddie Brown of Georgetown gave it up to James Worthy. Dean Smith had the title by a point. North Carolina will be going against Penn, which is 13-13. Tom Snyder's team, 2 tournament teams in the last 3 years with a combined record of 25-31. Navy, the Middies, reached the Final 8 last year. Michigan coming off a big win against Purdue. Notre Dame, 8 straight wins. Digger Phelps has them rolling 22-7. They'll go against Middle Tennessee State. TCU, the regular season SWC champ, 23-6 record there against the Thundering Herd of Marshall, the Southern Conference champion. In Syracuse at the Carrier Dome, these games will be played Friday and Sunday, March 13th and 15th. Florida, congratulations to Norm Sloan. First time the University of Florida has been in the NCAA tournament. NC State, Jim Valvano. What a year he had. He beat North Carolina, finally came back, and he's in the tournament with a 19-14 record. Purdue, the 5th straight NCAA appearance for the Boilermakers against Northeastern. West Virginia, out of the Atlantic 10 with a 23-7 record, go against the Hilltoppers of Western Kentucky. Syracuse, playing at home with a 26-6 record, will go against Georgia Southern. In the Southeast, in Atlanta, at the Omni, March 13th and 15th. These games will be played Friday and Sunday. Georgetown, the winner of the Big East tournament, the #1 seed, will go against Bucknell. In the Southeast, Kentucky, surprisingly high seed with an 18-10 record, goes against Ohio State. Kansas, led by Danny Manning, goes against Washington if Washington should win the Pac-10 today. If not, it will be Houston. Right now, the score in that game, UCLA leads it 61-53. They're in the second half. 9 minutes remain. Clemson, out of the Atlantic Coast Conference, will go against Southwest Missouri State from the Mid-Continent Conference. Now, in Birmingham at the Civic Center, these games will be played Thursday and Saturday, March 12th and 14th. Providence, first appearance since 1978. Alabama-Birmingham, the winner of the Sun Belt, is the 11th seed. Illinois, out of the Big Ten, gets the #3 seed and will play Austin Peay. First time for Austin Peay since 1974. In the Southeast, congratulations to the Privateers. A marvelous season. Their first trip Division I to the NCAA. We'll play BYU. Alabama gets the number 2 seed, the 6th straight appearance for Alabama, and they will go against North Carolina A&T, which beat Howard. So there you have it. Now we are halfway through the process, and we'll be back to look at the Midwest and the West right after these messages. The road to the Final Four begins here in Kansas City. Playing Georgia Southern. We said Georgia Southern. It was not correct on the board. It is Syracuse, the 2nd seed, going against Georgia Southern, which is the 15th seed in the East, playing at the Carrier Dome. That game will be played on Friday. All right, now the second half of the seeds. Now let's go out to the Midwest, and that's where we'll pick it up. They'll be played at Indianapolis at the Hoosier Dome Thursday and Saturday, March 12th and 14th. Indiana, the Big Ten champions. Now keep in mind, Indiana last year got in first round against Cleveland State, the Cinderella team, and lost it, 83-79. They will go against Fairfield out of the Metro Atlantic Conference. Auburn, out of the SEC, will play San Diego, the number 9 seed. Duke, last year's finalist, the runner-up out of the Atlantic Coast Conference, lost early in the Atlantic Coast Conference tournament, goes against Texas A&M, upset winner in the Southwest Conference tournament. In the Midwest, as we carry on, Missouri is there. What a job Norm Stewart has done in the Big 8, and he goes against Xavier, the 13th seed. At Rosemont, Illinois, Friday and Sunday, March 13th and 15th, St. John's, the Redmen, go against Wichita State. I think Eddie Fogler should be Rookie of the Year. 23 wins after his team at Wichita State only had a 500 season last year. Number 3, DePaul, goes against Louisiana Tech, the 14th seed. DePaul playing in Rosemont, Illinois, the home team. Georgia Tech, out of the Atlantic Coast Conference, with a 16-12 record, is in and goes against LSU. Dale Brown, a marvelous job in that tournament. Temple, 31-3, out of the Atlantic Conference. The Atlantic 10 champs go against Southern. So, we have now taken you through 3 of the seeds, 3 of the regions. And there have been a few surprises. Obviously, the big story thus far has to be some of the teams playing at home, like Syracuse playing at the Carrier Dome, DePaul playing at Rosemont. Now, let's go to the West. These games will be in Salt Lake City, the Special Events Center, Thursday and Saturday, March 12th and 14th. The Runnin' Rebels of UNLV reached the Final Four in 1977. Go against Idaho State. Now, the last time Idaho State made the tournament was in 1977. UNLV beat them in the West Regional Final. Georgia, another SEC team, comes in against Kansas State. Now, Kansas State, many thought, sitting on the bubble, but now is in as the number 9 seed. The Cavaliers of Virginia took North Carolina the other night 2 overtimes before finally losing, the 5th seed, going against Wyoming, the WAC champs. UCLA, the first appearance since 1983 for UCLA. Now, this is a team with a storied past. They have not been in since '83. However, it was John Wooden, the Wizard of Westwood, who took them to 10 national championships. He had the talent, Lou Alcindor for one. And what about Bill Walton, the big guy? This year, it's Reggie Miller. How far can he take the Bruins of UCLA? UCLA will go against Central Michigan. Now, in Tucson, Arizona, these games will be played the 13th and the 15th of March, Friday and Sunday games. The 6th seed, the Sooners of Oklahoma, and they'll be going against Tulsa, so it is an all-Oklahoma battle. In the West, the 3rd seed is Pitt, going against Marist. 2 Eastern teams, Marist from Poughkeepsie, New York. The 7th seed, University of Texas El Paso, going against Arizona, which is playing at home in Tucson. And Iowa, the number 2 seed out of the Big Ten, going against Santa Clara, the West Coast Athletic Conference champions. So there you have it, the 64 teams for the 1987 NCAA men's tournament. Now, when we come back, we will look at some of the conferences and how many teams they put into this tournament. And we will also talk to Dick Schultz, who is the chairman of the selection committee. Right now, let's go back to New York, and here's Jim Nance.
All right, thank you, Tim. Right now, we can tell you our schedule for Thursday night. We'll tip off our coverage of the tournament at 11:30 Eastern Time with a game from Salt Lake City, Virginia against Wyoming. Wyoming, the winner of the Western Athletic Conference tournament. Then on Friday night from Tucson, we'll have that battle of Oklahoma. Tulsa against the Sooners. That's at 11:30 Eastern Time. And as Tim mentioned, when we come back, we'll hear from Selection Committee Chairman Dick Schultz. That's coming up in just a moment. But right now they are playing the Big 8 final, 10 minutes to go, and the Tigers are leading by 5. Now the one that's really important is in the Pac-10, and that championship game, UCLA leading by 9 with 5.5 minutes to go. Now, should Washington lose, Houston will make the field of 64. Right now, let's go back to Tim Brandt in Kansas City. Tim?
And thank you very much, Jim. And we are back in Kansas City, and now we are joined by Dick Schultz, the chairman of this year's selection committee, the athletic director at the University of Virginia. And Dick, the first thing I want to ask you is about the defending national champions. Louisville did not make it. Villanova did not make it from the year before.
Well, the toughest call in there, of course, was Louisville. Not so much Louisville itself, but the Metro Conference. And I think we need to understand that situation. The Metro Conference, according to our information, on 2 votes, voted unanimously to include, number 1, Memphis State in their tournament, even though they were not eligible to participate this year, and also that the tournament winner would determine the automatic bid. So what happened is that Memphis State won. They're not eligible to go. So now all of the teams in the Metro Conference have to be considered as at-large teams. And when we put Louisville back in the mix as an at-large team with 14 losses, we just didn't feel that they deserved to be in there. Villanova, pretty much the same thing. Villanova had 14 or 15 losses, and we felt just wasn't able to be in there.
The key point there is that the athletic directors did vote to let Memphis State play in the tournament, although many people that are watching this show had read the newspapers where Denny Crum and some of the other coaches were very outspoken about Memphis State being in the tournament. All right, let's talk about some of the other tournaments that were on the fence that did not make it. For instance, last year's Cinderella team, Cleveland State, which was 23-7, or Howard, for instance, which had the longest winning streak in Division I.
We had 17 teams this year, which is actually fewer than in the past, with 20 wins or more that did not get in. In the past 3 or 4 years, there's been 20-some teams with 20 wins or more that have gone in. It basically came down, we felt, as a committee, to Southwest Missouri and Cleveland State being in the same conference. They were pretty much even. We decided to let the winner of that championship game be the team that goes, even though that conference does not have an automatic bid.
Okay, now if there has ever been a year of parity, this is certainly it. More parity this year than I think ever before. There is not a dominant team. So as we look at the conferences, we see that the ACC put 6 into the tournament, the Southeastern Conference has 6, and the Big Ten has 6.
With the ACC, they probably would have had 5 had not North Carolina State won today. I don't think that as a committee we would have felt that we could have put any at-large team in with 14 or 15 losses. And had NC State lost today, they would have had 15 losses. So you might say that NC State really played their way in. Georgia Tech was in because of their toughness of schedule and because of their record, both head-to-head and on a national basis. So that's how the ACC got their 6 in. They basically probably deserved 5, but North Carolina State played their way in. The SEC was a very tough conference this year, as was the Big Ten. And the SEC, when you take a look at their teams, their records aren't that impressive overall, but they just chewed each other up in the conference all year long. If you take a look at their losses, they've just been beating up on each other all year long.
Before we talk about some of the teams that are playing at home, for instance, Syracuse and DePaul, let's go back to New York now. Billy Packer has a question for you, Dick. Billy?
Dick, we always hear about the great advantage of television exposure, but this last weekend exposed some people who got blown out, and one in particular really surprised me is Purdue, that looked like a solid shot as a #1 seed moving all the way down to a #3. Did that game yesterday kind of really hurt them?
Well, I think what that did, Billy, I think that just created a switch in positions between Indiana and Purdue. We did not do any seeding until probably 12:30 or 1 o'clock today, so we had all that information available to us before we started the seed, but I think probably that switched Indiana and Purdue in the seeding procedure.
You mean to tell me that an Indiana and Purdue would go from a 1 to a 3 based on one game, the way they played throughout the course of the season?
Well, I'll tell you, we felt there was so much parity between the first 8 to 12 teams in there that any one of those teams were almost interchangeable. The other thing you have to keep in mind in looking at the seeding, and that becomes a little bit deceptive, we're back to our old principle of not allowing conference teams to replay each other until the finals of the regional. So you've had to have some adjustments in seeds in there to keep those teams from playing in the second round or in the semifinal round. So don't let the 2 and the 3 deceive you in there. We couldn't have a 1 and 2 from the same conference together.
All right, Dick, thank you very much. Thank you for your help this weekend. The field is set. Now the headache's over, and now you can just sit back and relax and enjoy some basketball.
The headache might just be starting.
You look at some of the second-round games, Kentucky, Georgetown, and St. John's DePaul. There are some tremendous matchups. Right now, let's go back to New York. Here's Jim Nance.
All right, thank you, Tim. And when we come back, we'll hear from Brent and Billy and go through the pairings once more as we continue on the selection show in just a moment.
From Pella Windows and Doors.
Thursday will be from Salt Lake City. Again, it'll be Wyoming against Virginia. It gets started at 11:30 Eastern Time. Now, in that Pac-10 final, 2 minutes to go now, and UCLA has an 8-point lead over Washington. The Houston Cougars anxiously watching the result of this game because should Washington lose, then the Houston team would be in the field of 64. All right, Brent and Billy, who is this year's Purdue team?
Who has to go and try to win? Well, if you look right away at the pair, Purdue's going to Syracuse, but they're not going to have to play the Orangemen up in the Carrier Dome. The team that faces the toughest test is going to wind up being Illinois. If UAB beats Providence, now remember they're in Birmingham, and Illinois beats Austin Peay, then they must beat Birmingham in that city. And boy, that's going to be a tough go, even though folks around the country really like the Fighting Illini right now.
Well, I think the Big Ten is going to be in a rough road, both of those places having to travel. But UAB is an outstanding team. They're coming on strong now. Gene Bartow, tournament tested. He's been in there for a long time now. This is his 7th year in a row. So it's a club with explosive guard play. Illinois will have their hands full.
Hey, you're surprised about the pairings. I could tell by your question to Dick.
I'm surprised at how much people have moved in relative strength as opposed to the year all of a sudden on this last weekend. DePaul, I mean, I would have looked at DePaul as a real threat to be a #1 seed, you know, and all of a sudden they're dropping down to a 3. In the same way with some of the Big Ten teams. I thought they were ranked a little lower than I anticipated.
All right, fellas, let's go right back through the pairings again, starting out with the East. Of course, the first round at Charlotte. #1 North Carolina will go against the Ivy League champion Penn. That Navy-Michigan game looks like an interesting one.
Exactly. Both those teams are tournament tested, and it could wind up North Carolina against the winner on Saturday to start the triple-header, and that'll be a good matchup on Saturday.
Middle Tennessee State gets into the tournament. That's another story, Billy.
That really surprised me. I mean, if you start talking about Louisville, everybody said you got to play a tough schedule, and Louisville certainly did. They're not in, and Middle Tennessee State is. So it'll be interesting. Digger Phelps likes to be the giant killer. He might be in a reverse position here, similar to last year.
All right, that's the Charlotte bracket. Let's move to Syracuse in the East. Florida, North Carolina State, the Wolfpack. Could this be another Cinderella story for them?
Hey, I saw them just a couple of weeks ago, and I wondered if they were going to get in any tournament when you saw that game at Duke. But Jimmy Valvano's got the magic wand come March.
And as Brent mentioned, Syracuse will have the home court advantage playing at the Carrier Dome the first 2 games, should, of course, they get by Georgia Southern. Now, in Birmingham, in the Southeast Regional, Providence and UAB, that's a tough assignment, obviously, for Providence, having to play on their home court.
They've got a week to rest up a little bit. They couldn't handle 2 nights in a row in the Big East tournament, but it's a very, very good club.
New Orleans, the host of this year's Final Four. That's a team a lot of people like with Liddell Eccles down there.
But, you know, look at below them, Jimmy. Alabama really is a team that a lot of folks think can go all the way to the Final Four this year. That'll be tough if they meet them.
Alabama went through the regular season, won the SEC, won the postseason tournament today. Now, also in the Southeast region, in Atlanta, Georgetown draws Bucknell, but it could be Georgetown versus Kentucky. Even Ohio State, that's a good game over the weekend.
Well, I'm fascinated about Georgetown winding up #1 in the Southeast because a lot of the Hoyas today said, you think we can go out west? You think we can be in Tucson?
They were all asking to go west. That's their lucky sight.
Again, Washington playing right now against UCLA, and should the Huskies lose that game, they're down 8 with 2 minutes to go. Houston would move in and play Kansas. Clemson's in there against Southwest Missouri State, another team that got an at-large bid. Let's move to the Midwest now. At Indianapolis, Auburn from the SEC will go against San Diego. Now, San Diego also, it should be pointed out, was an at-large selection. They did not win their postseason tournament. Billy, they've got a good big man.
I understand that, and I look at that Duke, Texas A&M. Can you believe a team finishes in the bottom of a conference and has an opportunity to go through a postseason tournament? And Missouri, a team that's been sneaking up on everybody all year long, coming out of the Big 8.
All right, in Chicago, starting out this week, St. John's will go against Wichita State. DePaul, the 3rd seed. You brought that up before. I'm surprised by that.
You know, you would think that St. John's would take on DePaul, but the way that Johnny's played in the Big East tournament, you really wonder if they can put it back together against Wichita State. They got a lot of work to do with that team this year.
Wichita State beating Tulsa on their home court just a week ago.
And LSU last year was the 11th seed in a region, made it to the Final Four. This year they draw the 10th spot in the Midwest. All right, let's move on now to the West in Salt Lake City. Number 1 UNLV goes against Idaho State, a surprise winner of the Big Sky tournament. You know anything about them at all, Billy?
I really don't, and of course, you know that Jerry's going to want them running early.
Yeah, I know Montana State should be there.
A little biased.
All right, also in the West at Tucson, and that'll start on Friday, the Battle of Oklahoma. Those two will be paired, Oklahoma and Tulsa. Pittsburgh goes out west against Marist, and we know they've got the big guy, Rick Smits.
And Pittsburgh struggled in the Big East tournament, particularly in the backcourt, not shooting well.
How about Arizona? Now, there's a team that'll be playing at home.
Exactly, and they could draw Iowa, and the Hawkeyes will have their hands full against their former coach, Lute Olson, if it comes down to that, too, in the second round.
So that's a look at the 64 teams that have made the NCAA field, and noticeably absent, of course, is Louisville. What do you think about that?
I really think Denny Crum threw it out on the line. He played a lot of people that he did not have to play. He went after opponents. He played TV games that were tough, a lot of made-for-TV games. It really may reconstruct his thinking there, because if you take on all comers, you ought to be credited for it. But they never did look good on TV, and that may have hurt them.
Billy, I think the defending champion should get an automatic bid. I think they should come back to defend their title.
Are you a defending champ when you don't have the same players?
Well, good question.
All right, we may know the 64th team because only 10 seconds remaining at Pauley Pavilion. It's UCLA over Washington, 76-62. So it's going to be Houston into the field of
Cougars
64. The alma mater will make the field. They got to be happy down there. Pat Foster in his first year. I don't like this, though, having two teams either or coming into us.
Well, they have to do that unless they tell the Pac-10 that they've got to play their championship on Saturday night.
It may have been a message to them, Brandon. In fact, you better get your tournament over early.
All right, guys. Thank you. It's official. UCLA won it. We'll see you Thursday night with Wyoming and Virginia. For Brett Musburger, Billy Packer, and Tim Brandt.